Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know if Kickstarter is launching this week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the Kickstarter and GameFound campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. Before we get started, I do like to go over the past week and just let you know of some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out about, and I do have a couple to share, and the first one is that there's going to be a brand new version of Betrayal at House on the Hill, and this is going to be the 3rd edition. If you're not familiar with this game, this is a game that starts cooperatively where players are exploring a haunted house, and as you're exploring, you're trying to better prepare yourself for what is about to happen, because you're going to be periodically rolling dice, and each time you roll those dice, it's going to be more and more likely to trigger a haunt, and once that happens, players are going to be picking a scenario from the booklet, and the scenario is based on the circumstances that led up to the haunt. So it's always going to be something a little bit different, well, actually quite a bit different, because all these scenarios have a wildly different story and different objectives that players are trying to achieve, but they normally pin one player against all the rest, or one player might become possessed or be revealed to be a cultist or someone that lured the other players to the house for their nefarious deeds, and then players will be playing out that scenario. And this is a game that usually has a ton of laughs and you end up with a really fun story at the end of the game, but it's also been considered to have some pretty wildly unbalanced scenarios, so it's always been more about just having a good time. But it looks like with this version they have addressed that with the 50 brand new scenarios. They did design them to be a little bit more streamlined and to run more smoothly, and they also categorize them into 5 different thematic tones. And if you're looking forward to even more new content for this game, they are going to be working on some new expansions as well. And the next announcement is that there's going to be a bunch of new expansions for Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. This is a simpler, quicker to play, and more card-focused version of Terraforming Mars. These new expansions are going to be adding a bunch of new modules for players to explore, as well as increasing the player count and even adding a co-op mode. I'm not going to go into too much detail into these modules, but if you do want to know more, definitely check out Alex's channel over at Board Game Co, because he covers all of these in detail and even shows you some of the components as well. I believe Rado also put out a video covering these as well, so if you want to see a couple different perspectives, definitely check out his channel too, and I'll leave a link to Alex's right up here. And I definitely didn't forget this part and then film it at the end of my video after I already recorded everything, and then splice it at the beginning just to explain it like I am now, and I probably should just pretend like this was the plan all along. Yeah, that definitely didn't happen. But make sure to check out Board Game Co's channel if you also want to know upcoming games in March, because I do this every week covering the week, but he also puts out a video at the start of the month covering most of the games in the month. These games are always changing, always moving around, so you still want to check out my videos, but if you want a good idea of all the big games that are coming out each month, definitely check out Board Game Co's channel and see what Alex has to say. He has a lot of great info and a ton of really helpful other videos. He's one of the content creators that I watch on a regular basis, and I have limited time, so I really appreciate his content. I think you will too, so definitely check it out and subscribe if you like his content. And that's all I want to cover for new announcements this week, so let's get into the Kickstarters. And the first one we have launches on March 7th, and this is going to be for Farcry Beyond. If you're not familiar with Far Cry, this was originally a video game, and there's been quite a lot of games in the series so far. I've played several of them, and they've all been amazing. Each one does have a very different story, but they normally have a very open world feel with a lot of exploration, and the games give a lot of tools to the players to come at different challenges with a lot of different options. This board game version is going to take place back in 1984 on an alternative history of Earth, where players are going to be involved in both a Cold War as well as a time where the Earth is being hit by a barrage of meteor showers. And this is going to present this story through a cooperative legacy campaign with several acts, and with each act having several scenes. There's going to be different options to the player on how to complete these different challenges that the acts present. And because this is a legacy game, you can expect new rules and components to make their appearance as the game moves forward, and there will be stickers that get added to the rulebook to change the way that the game plays as it evolves over time. The different decisions that the players make will change the way that the story unfolds, and players will be playing as their own individual characters with their own special abilities and player boards, which they'll further be able to customize through the use of weapons, stunts, loot, and reaction cards. Combat in this game is done with dice, and depending on the weapon that you use, you're going to be using different colored dice because the different colors have different probabilities as well as different damage points that they can inflict. So depending on which weapon that you're using, you're going to be rolling some different dice. The player's stunts allow for some special abilities that you can take advantage of by using action points. And then the loot or reaction cards allow players to use some special items or use some special abilities, but these ones are one-time use only. A really neat aspect of this game is that the map will offer some different cover for the players to take advantage of, but this can be used against you by the enemies as well. And if you are taking advantage of cover, this will allow players to have a better vantage point and potentially take less damage in combat. The enemies do attack in the same way as the players, but they're going to be driven by AI cards which will dictate their actions. But if a player does get taken out by an enemy, it's not the end of the world, because players can also be revived as well. Of course, this is something you still would want to avoid, because if all players are knocked down, then you lose the game. At the end of an act, players will be going up against a final boss, and once you win, you will be revealing the next portion of the story, which will be revealed in a hidden envelope. Definitely one worth checking out, especially if you are a fan of the series. And the next campaign we have launches on March 8th, and this one's called Monster Pit. And this plays 1 to 5 players. It takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And I thought this one was actually already launching, so I already covered this one in a previous video. So I will roll that footage now. And this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this is coming from Elzra Games, who created Catacombs, and this is a new game added to the Catacombs series. And this is an interesting one because it's kind of like 2 games in one, because it takes some elements from the previous games in the Catacombs series, but then combines them into a single game. And the reason I say that this is like 2 games in one is because the first half of the game, you're going to be fighting on the land, defending your castle in a sort of tower defense type game. And you're going to be using a tableau of characters that you're going to be building up throughout the game. In addition to your tableau, you're also going to have a main captain that you can upgrade throughout the game. And this game uses primarily worker placement in order to complete your different actions. This is a 1 versus many, where one player will be playing as the monsters, while the other players are controlling their tableau of warriors and their individual captains. But where the second game comes into play is that if the heroes are successful in this first phase, then they're going to be chasing that monster deep into the underground catacombs, and you're actually going to be flipping the main player board over, as well as all your individual player boards. And then you're going to be fighting on the catacomb side of the board in the monster's territory. And this phase is going to play completely different than that first phase, although it still will be 1 versus many. This is going to transition the game into a dexterity flicking game. And players will be fighting through the catacombs, reaching that final boss, and hopefully taking out that final boss in order to win the game. The game is intended to be played as a 2-part epic adventure, but the 2 individual modes can also be played individually if you want a shorter game and if you only want to play one of those modes. Also launching on March 8th, we have Maul Peak, and this plays 2 players and takes about 40 minutes to play. And this is an asymmetric tactical combat game where players will be playing either as a tribe of bears or a towering behemoth of a guardian. And this is a really interesting combat game because it plays a lot different than almost every other skirmish game. Players will each be using dual-purpose cards, which will allow a wide variety of movement and abilities that they'll be able to use to try and get an advantage on their opponent. And the thing that I think makes this game really interesting is that the player who's playing the tribe of bears is not only going to be moving the tribe across a series of locations on the main board, but they're also going to be traversing the actual opponent's behemoth as well, because that behemoth is also going to have its own board, and the bear's tribe will have to climb that behemoth and perform actions in order to inflict damage and potentially win the game. This is a really interesting concept, but this isn't the first time that it's been done, because this is actually a iteration on the game Skull Hollow, and you can kind of consider this the sequel to that game. This newer version is going to allow for all the guardians or heroes to be pitted against each other in any way you like. And if you do already have Skull Hollow but you'd like to play it with more players, you definitely want to check this one out, because if you do mix the content together, that allows you to play with up to 4 players, with each player controlling their own tribe or behemoth. And launching on March 8th, we have Hydroracers, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is another campaign that I covered in the past, so I will find that footage and play it for you now. And now launching on November 16th, we have Hydroracers, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a racing game where players are going to be continually alternating between a racing phase and a development phase. And players are going to be taking control of different aircrafts that are going to be pretty basic at the start of the game, but then you're going to be developing it and continually improving, which is going to gradually change the pace and strategy that you have for each of the upcoming races. During a race, each player is going to take a turn to play an action card and also move their they're playing forward on the circuit. Players will have to be careful because taking certain risks can damage your plane, which you'll have to repair in the development phase. And during the development phase, each player is going to have a bag that they're drawing different chips from, and depending on the chip that they draw, they can decide where they want to place it on their player board. And each player is going to have their own asymmetric plane that operates a little bit different from the other players, as well as their own pilot that also has a unique ability. Players are going to be gaining victory points depending on how they perform for each race, and the player with the most victory points on the last race is going to win the game. And a really nice thing about this game is that players decide how many races they want to compete in at the start of the game, and that's going to effectively set the length of your game, as well as how many opportunities you'll have to upgrade your plane. And launching on March 8th, we have Cthulhu Island, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a competitive board game where players are trying to create their most grotesque theme park, and they're going to be getting different creatures and elder gods from other dimensions in order to show off in their park. Players are going to be starting by picking a director, which is going to give that player a special ability. Then they're also going to be starting with a specific ancient one as well. And each ancient one is going to have 3 special abilities that are unique to that ancient one. And each of these 3 abilities are stronger than the last, but they do come with a catch because in order to use your ancient one's abilities, you're going to have to make sacrifices. So make sure that you're recruiting as many cultists as possible. Players will also have a special action board where most of the actions will take place, but on a player's turn, they're going to be putting out a tile to expand the modular map, and then they're going to either explore those tiles or enlist or exterminate cultists. Each area on the map also comes with its own set of actions, and these can do different things like gain new powers for the player, summon creatures, build attractions, or entice visitors to your park, or destroy your opponents. In order to perform the actions on that map tile, you're going to have the most cultists there, so there is a bit of an area control aspect to this game as well. The game uses a Mancala system for you to perform your actions, so as you're performing the actions, they're going to be redistributed out on your board, but you want to be limited with the actions that you actually take, because if you use too many, you can actually open a portal to the other world, and that can have negative effects on your future turns. This game looks like a lot of fun. I love the theme, and I love the idea of these different powers and making sacrifices in order to use your Ancient One's powers, and it looks like this one's going to be coming with some really cool miniatures as well. So definitely one worth checking out, especially if you are a fan of the Cthulhu mythos, or making sacrifices. And the next campaign we have is also launching on March 8th, but this one is not for a game, but it's definitely still worth mentioning. And this is going to be the campaign for Drive-Thru Games. And if you're not familiar with Drive-Thru Games, they offer a YouTube channel, much like myself, but these guys offer a ton of different reviews and playthroughs, and they've been doing this for over 10 years. And believe me, the YouTube gig is not an easy one to run. There's definitely a ton of prep and editing and getting involved with the community, which can definitely be a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but it 100% takes a lot of time and effort, and a lot of personal sacrifice. Trying to get content out on a regular basis often interferes with other things in your life, and things don't always line up to give you the time that you need. I think anyone doing this type of thing for a long period of time, especially if they're not getting paid by publishers, really does have to enjoy it, because in the end, with deadlines and trying to get content out, this does kind of feel like a second job, but with a fraction of the pay. And by no means does that fall on the viewers to make this more financially viable for us. It was our decision to do this type of thing, and it was our decision to make whatever sacrifices are required to produce this sort of content. But helping a content creator make all this effort just a little bit more sustainable does have a huge impact, and it does make this a little bit more healthy of an endeavor. So if you're a fan of Drive-Thru Games, definitely check out this campaign and consider making a pledge. It can get you some different shoutouts in the video, and they also do have some stretch goals for some special bonus videos that they'll do if they hit certain milestones. And this kind of support really goes a long way for any content creator. So if there's any other content creators that you do enjoy, most of us do have a Patreon set up or something similar. Usually we link to it in the description of our videos or on our website. And for me personally, it really does feel like each of my Patreons is part of this content creation process, because they are all contributing and supporting the work here. At least that's how I feel about it. And even though the whole concept of this type of funding for a content creator is really solely there to support that content creator, a lot of us do offer some bonus content as well for anyone that does sign up for it. It's always nice to support and encourage someone's work, but it's never a bad thing if you also get something out of it as well. And launching on March 8th, we have The Fog Escape from Paradise, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a competitive board game where players are guardians attempting to coordinate islanders off the island into different boats before a deadly fog takes over the island, engulfing anything in its way. The different boats are all divided into different sections where only certain islanders can occupy, but all the islanders do start off on the island itself, and players are going to be drafting them at the start of the game, putting their own little ring on each islander and trying to get their islanders to the boat first before those boats get filled. After all the drafting has occurred, players are going to be taking turns spending action points to perform different movement actions, and these will allow players to move through different obstacles, or move, swap, jump, or push their islanders amongst the other islanders. A neat thing to take into consideration as you're drafting your islanders is that each of the islanders does have an icon on them which allows them to perform one of these actions at a reduced cost. So depending on which of your islanders you're moving, you may be more incentivized to perform a specific action so that you're saving your action points to perform more actions in the future. And you'll really want to keep an eye on which of your islanders are straggling behind, because after each round the fog is going to move closer and closer to the shoreline, and any of the islanders that get enveloped in that fog are going to be removed from the game. Once the fog gets to the end of the board, players will be scoring points based on how many islanders they manage to save into the boats, and the player with the most points will win the game. And also launching on March 8th, we have Hamlet, the village building game. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this one is also our Discord pick of the week. And I'm not surprised because this game looks like a lot of fun, and it's also from the same designer that created games like The Pursuit of Happiness, Petrichor, or And Then We Held Hands. And those are all very popular games with a lot of really positive reviews. But this game plays quite a bit differently than those ones. And I think this is the one that I'm actually the most excited about, because this one is a tile laying and route building game that puts a little bit of a spin on the genre. If you take a look at the pictures of the game, you'll notice that a lot of these tiles are irregularly shaped. I think that will add a few different things to the game. The first is that it will make your town grow in a more natural way rather than it being completely consisting of either squares or octagons or pentagons. And it will just give that growth of your town a more organic feel. Not only that, but I think it will put a bit more restrictions on the players as they're trying to grow out the town and build different networks and supply chains. They're going to have to get creative with the tiles that they're placing, since tiles won't necessarily just lock in wherever you need them. And this is a competitive game, but players will be all contributing their tiles to the same town, and players are going to be constructing buildings that everyone can use to create different materials, refine resources, earn money, or make important deliveries to the center of the town, which is all focused around the main church. All the tiles have their own uses, and players will be taking advantage of this to create different supply chains throughout the game, but then players will be using donkeys in order to move those resources across the board. And players will be earning victory points in a variety of different ways through the tile placement, the generating of resources, and refining those resources into other resources. I don't have too much more info on how this one plays right now, so if this seems like one that you might be interested in, definitely subscribe to their campaign, because I think there'll be a lot more to be excited about as more details are revealed. And if you do want to know more, I have links to this campaign and all the others in the description below. Launching on March 8th, we have Small City Deluxe Edition. This plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And in this game, each player will have their own grid and their own player shield, and players will be placing tiles in order to build cities on their grid. Each round, players will each be selecting their own special action from a circle of action cards. The first player can choose any of these cards, but then the next player has to choose either the one to the left or the right of that card, or they can pay an additional cost to choose one of the other cards. And players will be using this ability as well as paying any cost and meeting any placement requirements in order to build buildings out on their grid. Some of these buildings will generate resources or money, but they can also generate pollution. Luckily, players can also build parks to combat the pollution, and then players will be moving their meeples around on their board in order to visit these different buildings to gather those resources, which they can use on future turns to build more buildings or upgrade the buildings that they already have. The players will also be using whatever influence they have to modify the city council, and this is going to change the type of bonuses and opportunities that are presented to the players, so players are going to want to try and manipulate this to their favor. And this new version is going to feature a completely revised rulebook, new artwork from Kwanchai Moria, which is one of my favorite board game artists, and then it's going to feature some new variants that will allow players to play the game a little bit differently. Also on March 8th, we have Route East, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a racing game where players are trying to be the first to get from Istanbul to Shanghai. And players are going to be doing this by performing 3 actions on their turn. They can move across the map, or they can spend an action to play or gain action cards, and these are going to be the cards that allow you to perform some special abilities throughout the game. But the catch here is that players not only have to be the first to reach Shanghai, but they also have to visit 3 specific attractions that they drew at the start of the game. But that is also not going to be easy because players also have a limited budget and fuel, and you're definitely not going to have enough of each to complete your trip if you're playing fairly. And that's where the action cards come into play, where players can start to bend the rules to their favor or dish out a little bit of take that, where they might steal some resources from their opponent or prevent their opponent from debilitating them. There's a ton of cards in this game which will offer a lot of variability from game to game, and the artwork for this one also looks fantastic, especially with all the different attractions on the different cards, each with their own individual artwork. All that and the really simple rule set will make this one a great option for a party setting, or if you're playing with people who aren't really interested in a high strategy drawn out game. And just like all the other campaigns in this video, if you want to see more, I have links in the description below. And launching on March 8th, we have Warpgate, and this plays 1 to 6 players. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a fast-paced 4X game that focuses on hand management and area control. In this game, players will each have their own asymmetric alien race with its own unique abilities, and the board is made up of large modular tiles which allow for quick setup, but then also a lot of variability from game to game. Players will each have their own hand of cards, and each round they're going to be choosing 4 of those to play, and the way that this works is that players will be putting each of those down on their player board in sequential order, because the ones played later in that order do get a multiplier and more powerful effects. And these cards will allow for different actions such as moving across the board, fighting, recruiting more ships, performing research, trading with other planets, taking control of different planets to gain different objective cards, and generally growing your galactic empire. So you'll really want to consider which of these cards you're playing later in your turn, because the first one you play is just played as is, but then the second one gets a 2 times multiplier, the third one gets a 3 times multiplier, and the fourth one gets a 4 times multiplier. So that fourth card can be super powerful. If your cards are running low or you just want more options for your strategy, you can also play one of these cards face down. You won't get to play any action for that turn, but it will allow you to pick up more action cards which you can take advantage in future turns. And as players grow their fleet and move them across the hex-based board, they're going to be battling for control of different areas and the resources that those areas provide. And your ability to take control of these different areas does depend on your presence there, but you can also play different support cards as well in combat, which will grant some multipliers to your combat cards, but also add some special effects which can be good or bad depending on how the battle plays out. And there's a few different endgame triggers that players can pursue when certain decks or tiles run out. That's going to trigger the end of the game where the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if this one does interest you, definitely check it out and follow along, because if you follow before the campaign starts, it'll earn you a €5 discount. And launching on March 8th, we have Motor City, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a strategic roll and write where players are going to be running their own manufacturing plant, doing their QA testing, driving those cars on different tracks, and then selling those cars in auto dealerships in order to earn income. And this one is also my personal pick of the week. And there are a few reasons I'm picking this one. The first is that this is coming from the same designers that created Fleet the Dice game and Three Sisters, which are both fantastic roll and write games. So it gives me a lot of confidence in this one as well, but they've also co-designed this one with a new designer, so I do expect that this one's going to play quite a lot different from those previous 2. I also really like how the actions work in this game, where players are going to be rolling dice of different colors, and depending on the color and the number that is rolled, you're going to be placing it on this grid here, which is going to dictate the actions that are available to the players. Players will each draft 2 dice, and each die that's drafted will allow players to perform 3 actions. There's an action associated with the space that the die was on, an action associated with the column it was taken from, and then you're finally going to be able to place that die on one of the 4 spaces on your sheet, and then you're going to perform the action there as well. And each player is going to have 2 different sheets with multiple areas represented by tracks where they can make progress. First is the production department, which can grant all sorts of resources as well as victory points, and it's going to give the player a few different options in paths and directions that they can check off to pursue the resources that they want, but some of these paths will have requirements that must be met in the other departments before you're able to move further in those those directions. And then there's the engineering department, which does work similar, except these are more singular tracks where players will choose which tracks they want to pursue, and then you're going to get a really powerful bonus at the end of that track. These ones are more of a straight shot, so once you start pursuing one, you're probably going to want to finish it before you move on to the other engineering tracks. The testing department allows you to race one of those cars around the tracks, picking up different bonuses along the way, but this one does come with a financial cost because you're going to have to pay for one of those cars in order to test it out on the track. The sales department is where you can spend actions in order to earn money, which you can then spend to perform other actions later in the game. And then there is the speedometer that doesn't grant you any bonuses in itself, but it is a multiplier to the amount of points that you earn in later rounds. Instead of making progress in these different departments, players can also pursue different upgrade tracks, such as the research track, where every third advancement allows the player to get a free action or a bonus of their choice, or they can instead choose to upgrade one of the dice placement locations on their personal sheet to make that action more powerful in future turns. If you are a fan of roll and writes like me, definitely check this one out. I think this one's going to be pretty fast paced with having 3 actions to perform with each of the dice that you draft. But then it's also going to present a lot of great choices, since more than likely each of those dice are going to have things that you want. Combine all that with proven designers, a simple rule set, and a great price point, and you're going to have me clicking that notify on launch button. And the last campaign we have launches on March 9th, and this one's called Tiwanaku, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this is a campaign that I did cover in the past. It was previously known as Pachamama, and they pulled it down to make some tweaks and launch a better campaign, but honestly I thought their previous campaign looked fantastic. The game looks really solid, and I will roll that footage now. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is an exploration and hidden information and deduction game where players are going to be using a combination of certain elements to try and deduce where certain crop tokens are going to appear to work towards winning the game. At the start of each game, a scenario disc is chosen, and this is what houses all the secret information. The scenario disc is going to outline the starting tiles used for the game as well as the tiles used for the entirety of the game, and it's also going to specify the crop tokens and where they get placed on the different tiles. One side is kept secret from all players, while the other just dictates the initial setup of the game. This is going to get slid into the actual Pachamama wheel, which has some sliding windows, and players will be rotating the disc depending on different coordinates on the board in order to determine which crop tokens will be placed there. And this is a game where players have a number of Explorer meeples, and on their turn they get to choose one out of 2 actions. They can either explore or divine. If players choose to explore, they'll be able to move existing meeples on the board or add a new meeple. When they do that, they'll be able to move that meeple as much as they want orthogonally, as long as it doesn't cross paths with another player, and the meeple will also stop on any empty space. So you can actually move your meeple as much as you like, as long as it meets those requirements. And when a player ends their movement on an empty space, they're going to be adding a tile there by using the discovery disc and rotating it to match the coordinates of their meeple's location. The wheel that the disc was put in at the start of the game has some sliding windows, and players are going to be opening up the sliding window to see what tile type is going to be added to the board. Once you place that tile, you increase your diversity track for that type of tile that you placed, and you're also going to gain points for the terrain type that it was. And then there is the divine action, which I think is the really interesting one here because it allows you to deduce which crops should be placed on which tile. And this is going to allow you to deduce the crop tile that goes on all the meeples you've placed out on the board that are currently on an empty terrain tile. For each one of those meeples, you'll be able to make a guess as to what crop tile should go onto that tile that your meeple is standing on. And you'll be able to do that continually for each of your meeples as long as you continue to make correct guesses. So players are going to choose one of their meeples in any order, and then they're going to make a guess as to what crop tile will go on that tile. Another player will take the wheel and rotate it to the coordinates to see if you're correct, and regardless if you're correct, the actual crop tile does get placed onto the board, and you're going to score points based on that crop tile. Different crops have different values, so you're going to really want to try to align yourself with the more valuable ones. Players will also gain an offering cube that matches the color of that crop type, and players can only own one of each color. At the end of your turn, you'll be able to trade those cubes for additional victory points, and the more unique colors you have, the better, because it exponentially increases the amount of points that you can get. But now I'll get into how the actual deduction works, and in order to deduce, there's actually 2 layers of deduction that players will have to consider. The first is the terrain types, and then the second is the crop tiles. So for the terrain types, there can never be more than 5 touching terrain tiles of the same type, and they can't be touching each other orthogonally or diagonally. Crop types are ranked from 1 to 5, and there can only be one of each crop type within a group of terrain tiles, and the maximum rank of crop tile that can be available in a group of tiles is equal to the number of tiles there. So that means that you can only have a rank 5 crop in a group of 5 terrain tiles. Same crop types can never be touching anywhere on the board, and that means that they can't be adjacent to each other or diagonal. So to sum everything up, players will want to get their meeples out on the board and position them on empty terrain tiles so that they can take the divine action, allowing them to deduce which types of crop tiles that they're standing on, and then gain the victory points for those crops. And the game ends once the last terrain tile is placed, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. I think the deduction in this game will be really fun because sometimes you'll know exactly what tile you're on, or other times you might have to make a guess, which is always exciting. I think the whole puzzle of moving your meeples while also trying to match your meeples with the tiles that you're most confident on is going to be a really fun challenge to try and complete. So if you're interested in this one, definitely go ahead and click that follow button on the campaign. I have links in the description below, and that'll also get you an additional scenario disc for a unique gameplay experience. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we have a few awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter. I don't ask for anything. You don't have to like, you don't have to subscribe. Although, if you do like this content, I do appreciate it. But all you have to do is leave a comment down below, simply for the fact that I need something to draw from. And the first campaign we have is for Factory 42, and this is a competitive game where all the players are working in a manufacturing facility, and players are trying to move around different mining carts and generate different resources in order to fulfill different orders to gain victory points. The catch here is that players are fulfilling orders for their government, but then also have to work within the requirements of the government. And you know how government works. There is a lot of bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is represented by a cube tower. And I know at first that might sound like it doesn't make much sense, but let me just tell you that this is a very inefficient cube tower. And I mean that in the best way, because this cube tower actually has multiple levels and compartments within it where cubes can get trapped and knocked around. And as you're putting cubes into the tower, you're not going to exactly see the same cubes come out, because cubes from previous turns were trapped in there, and the cubes that you're adding now will only knock those out. So you're going to get some sort of mix of the cubes you're adding, but also cubes from previous turns. So players will always know what's going into the cube tower and kind of have an idea of what's in there, but you never know exactly what's going to come out. And just like with a lot of bureaucracy, certain things can take longer than others. Definitely check out one of the videos on the campaign page if you want more details into the gameplay, or if you want a really quick summary with most of the details, definitely check out my shelf clip, which I have posted on the Board Game Geek page, or you can find it in my shelf clips playlist. And this giveaway is going to be for the Commissar pledge, which comes with the core game and all unlocked stretch goals. And all you have to do to enter this giveaway is leave a comment down below with the hashtag factory, and leave a comment letting us know a fun fact about any factory that you know, or maybe an experience that you've had in a factory. I actually work in the manufacturing space. I build software for manufacturers, so if you want to get your PLCs connected and your scheduling systems connected, definitely give me a call and I can help you out. But doing this type of work, I actually learned something really interesting about Nestle and the way that they make their chocolates. There's actually kind of 3 tiers of chocolates in the Nestle plant. You have your Aero bar, which is pure chocolate, and I guess you could kind of consider this one as the premium chocolate because it's the most pure. But the scrap from that one actually goes into the Kit Kat bar, but it doesn't stop there, because any scrap from the Kit Kat line actually gets fed into the Coffee Crisp line. So really the Coffee Crisp is the bottom of the barrel, but also it's my favorite chocolate bar. And next we have a giveaway for Worldbreakers, and this is a 2-player head-to-head card game where players are going to be building up their deck of cards, and they're going to be trying to be the first to gain a certain amount of power by engaging in different combat and building different locations. The neat thing about this game is that you're also trying to manage your status with different guilds, because some of the cards that you have will have status requirements that must be made with certain guilds. Players will also be spending a certain resource in order to activate different cards. And this one also has a combat system that's a little bit different from most combat card games, where most of these games usually have one card against another card in its lane. This one actually allows you to play as many of your cards as you want into combat, and then your opponent can counter that with as many cards as they like. Play goes back and forth until a player reaches a certain amount of power, and then that player wins the game. And this giveaway is for the $30 pledge, which gets you a copy of the game, as well as the Kickstarter exclusive promo cards. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Worldbreakers, and let us know what you would do with ultimate power. For myself, I'd definitely try to fix a lot of the issues I see in the world, but after that, I think I'd start tackling the biggest problem of all, and actually play all the games on my shelf. Good luck in the giveaways, but before we go, let's draw the winner for last week's giveaway, and this giveaway was for a pledge for Kabula. And to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content and you appreciate the work I'm doing here, definitely check that out. I truly appreciate it, and it helps make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me. Plus, it also gets you some bonus entries into these giveaways, which is always nice. So let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw the winner. And the winner is one of our Patreon subscribers, so I will reach out to you, Nicola, and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Kabula. And that's everything I have for you this week. I can't believe it's March already. I feel like this winter just flew by, but I'm really glad that restrictions are lifting and things are opening up again, and we're starting to get back to some normalcy. I have been following the stats periodically, and even back in January, 99.9% of all COVID cases were the Omicron variant, which is a very, very less severe version of COVID. So that's kind of great news. Also, those cases have peaked and come back down dramatically, which is even better news. So we're actually starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel from something that I wasn't sure was ever going to go away. I'm excited for all of us to get out again, feel more comfortable with our friends and family, seeing the people that we want to see and doing the things that we want to do. So I'm really hopeful for a comeback year and a lot of positive excitement in the months to come. But at the very least, the board games never slow down, so there's always that to look forward to. So until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.